Hello, my name is Justin Bright. Welcome to Kerbal Space Program version 1.8.1 in my next small step RP-1 career mode playthrough. You can see me futzing around with a rocket here, so I see no reason to hold off. Let's get right to it. We are launching Combox 3 in 3, 2, 1, ignition. And liftoff. We have cleared the tower and we are on our way up to join the other two Combox satellites to complete our communications network constellation, the early version. So yes, this should, in theory, work, I guess, maybe, to complete the contract, if nothing else. But then I'm really hoping that this is going to be something that we can use as a good communications network for a good long time. Looking up into orbit, ooh, that was suddenly very quiet, I see that I'm already failing on my assumptions that I had just a moment before, where, ooh, and the sound is back on, but very dull. Where I said about 1 million times right in a row that I don't think that the matching the orbits exactly is going to matter all that much, and it's already like way out of alignment. Like either I had it wrong to begin with, or something else is going weird. Like I can't imagine why that would have caught up so much on the other orbit so quickly. Like that seems very strange to me, but it's very possible that I'm just like talking completely out of my ass. Like I thought for sure that I knew what I was talking about with this one, but it's very possible that I didn't. So I'm going to try to put it down here in opposite anyways, and we're just going to kind of watch. And I think that's going to be, this is going to be an experiment more than a me complaining about troubleshooting this or whatever. It's going to be an experiment for us to see just how out of alignment these will get if you aren't really careful about aligning their orbits. So that's what we're going to call it. We're going to call it science, which is better than just admitting that I was completely mistaken about the orbital parameters that those were going to end up in. So we're burning on up with this. It's yet another TEL Able Star configuration, so nothing new or exciting there. Kicks that off, and we are on our way. No big deal. Yeah, so I'm finding myself just a little, like, I don't know, not troubled, but just curious about what I had so wrong, or if it was just a perspective thing with these two. So yeah, I'm actually looking forward to seeing how this test sort of shakes out. It's nice that this is a like planned obsolete network, one that I'm not going to have to worry about for a whole lot of time. It's not supposed to be my big permanent one that's going to last forever and service me throughout the rest of the entire game. All that sort of thing is not the case. This is a temporary installation that we are going to be using to test, literally, both the for the contract, for the communications network, and also the way that we get things into orbit. When we get around to, oh no, ignition failure on solid fuel. That's fine. I could care less about that. We got a good ignition on the AJ-10 mid. That's all I care about. All right, so we are adjusting to get into this orbit. Fabulous. All right, just about to finish up this burn, and I'm trying to remember what I was talking about. It's just a good test for myself on figuring this out. But the important thing is that when we do our big geostationary ComSat network, that is going to be a lot more precise, kind of by definition, because it needs to be in a perfectly geostationary orbit. Like that's what we need. We want it to be perfectly set. But then it's also going to need to be, it's going to have like deep space avionics and the ability to adjust its orbit, which this doesn't have. Like it's going to have its own little extra thruster. It's going to have more stuff. Like we're going to have better technology with which to do this. So this is an early ComSat network in a lot of different ways. All right, so this looks like it's going to be pretty well in opposition to the other two satellites. So when we are here at this little purple marker right up there, Combox 2 is going to be down here at intersect 2, and Combox 1 is going to be down here. So that's pretty as far away as I can get from both of those, and that's not too long from now. So let's plan on that. All right, we are coming up on the ignition to bring our orbit's apogee up to 10 million meters, and we have a good ignition. Fabulous. Yeah, so I'm finding myself a little bit stressed out because as of the time of this recording, my next episode, or my previous episode, oh man, what time is it anyways? What is time? Anyways, the episode that is going to have my launch of Combox 2 has not released as of the time of this recording. So I had a lot to say in the previous episode about it not mattering how far apart in the orbital parameters these craft were, because it was not going to drift enough to actually make a big difference. But now I'm wondering if I was just completely talking out of my ass and not correct at all, which is possible. But man, these things are in such, like, they're so close in orbit, like their orbital parameters are so similar that I thought for sure that it was not going to be something that moved that much. So it's also very possible that the reason why they're so far out is because I literally thought this was a bigger angle than it actually was. Like, just my perspective on moving this 3D rendering around might have been incorrect in that way. So yeah, that might be what it is. It might have moved around. So I think what we'll do now is when we get this into orbit, we're just going to kind of mark the positions, or I'll pay attention to where things are, and then later on, as things move forward, it'll be time for us to look at this and check and see what the heck happened, and if there was some, either was it put into a wrong orbit, or did it become a wrong orbit over time. So that'll be something to watch. Like I said, we'll call that a test. We'll call it science to cover up for any shortcomings that I had in my explanation. So if I was wrong about that, I'm very sorry. I'll try to correct that I'll try to correct the record in future episodes if the truth is that I said something actually wrong. But if it's just a matter of things like me eyeballing it incorrectly, then that's normal. I get that wrong all the time. All right, so just a couple more seconds till the end of this burn. 2, 1, and upper stage cutoff. Fabulous. And now we do that thing that we do, which is change inclination to 0 and circularize. Merge the nodes. And there we have it. We have a very similar looking orbit that should, in theory, be nice and far apart from the other two satellites. So let's execute this one as well. All right, here comes the burn. Just a moment until we start ullaging this up. There we go. And we have an ignition failure, so let's just port. Activate engine, try again. There we go. Not a big deal. Because this has unlimited ignition, so long as the ignition failure is not a catastrophic one, then we do not have any trouble. And I don't know, like, I'm wondering all of a sudden if there are catastrophic failures on test light compared to test flight. Because I honestly don't know, because have I had one? I'm not sure if I've had one. Usually when I have ignition failures, it was something that, oh my gosh, I am drifting. Hold on. Node word, please. Right, I was doing this automatically, but now I am not. So hopefully we will still be able to get into a good orbit here. Anyways, normally when I have ignition failures, it's either in the atmosphere, which causes an instant catastrophic rapid unplanned disassembly, or it just ends the mission instantly because I don't have any more ignitions. So it's not often that I have had the opportunity to have ignition failures that don't just instantly end the mission one way or the other. So I'm wondering now if there are catastrophic failures that cause the part to explode or shut down or lose all their ignitions or whatever. Because I don't think I've seen one. And if I have, it was masked by other things and I didn't notice. All right, we are just about there. 4, 3, 2, 1, cut. Oop, that was too soon. There we go, it's a little better. So what can I do? Am I a little too close? It looks like I'm a little too high. Yeah, orbit is off just slightly. I'm using RCS to try to finish off the node, and hopefully the node knows best. We're getting to the point where we're chasing it around a little bit here. Alright, close enough. Yeah, so if this drifts off, then we'll really know. Okay, so I can unset the target, and we can see now that we have a very janky 3-node network. We have 2 days to do shakeout testing because we have completed our 3-node early communications network with Combox 1, 2, and 3, and that has worked just fine. I love it. But what we're going to do now is we are going to point this at the sun as best we can. All right, so there we go. 100% sun exposure. Fantastic. We are all set on that. We're going to turn off the stuff, do the automation, separate, and we are going to just go ahead and watch this contract finish. All right, shakeout testing has completed. The network has been in orbit for upwards of 2 days, up and transmitting. Shakeout testing is complete, 180,000 funds, but more importantly, we have a 3-node communications network that is able to transmit down and get communications to almost all of low Earth orbit. Fantastic, I'm super excited about that. Hopefully this will stay in its weird little funky triangle that doesn't really work at all, but it's fine. We'll see how wrong I was over time. But yeah, this should work for what we needed to do. This should work just fine. Until, of course, we get to the next network. All right, we have researched 2nd generation capsules. Yes, indeed, and that is going to be incredibly expensive. The unlocks for the Gemini cabin is 375,000 funds, which is almost everything that we have. So we should probably hold off on that for now, I think. There's a lot here. There must be shared costs in between all these little bits, because the parachute is probably not actually going to cost us 375,000. I have to imagine that we're going to unlock this and it's going to give us most of these pieces. So yeah, I'm going to hold off on that for now until we are actually ready to start building our first Gemini mission, and we have a little bit of time to go before that. One thing that we need to make sure that we do is get all of our astronauts trained up on Gemini. So Proficiency Gemini, we have both Valerie Dunn and Lisa Kim are in training as we speak. They are working on this, and they should be done in the first week of June. So they still have the better part of a year before they're even proficient in the spacecraft, let alone any mission training. So Johnny Flores, sorry, is gonna take 393 days to get that training done. So let's just get him started. So that's gonna take a very long time indeed. But that, like I said, that just means we have a little bit more time to wait before we get to that point. So let's see what's next. It's time for a little Corona satellite. All right, so here we have on a pad the Corona satellite, as I mentioned. This we are launching just for the pure desire to get the darn science, and also to test my revamped return capsule. So we're going to see if that works any better than the previous ones did. So this is governed then just by the parameters of the science experiment. So we need to be above 60 degrees inclination, so I've picked 65, and we need a maximum altitude of 445 kilometers, which that's fine. We're going to do just a nice low 200-kilometer circular orbit because it needs to have an eccentricity that is very, very low. So yeah, that is what we are going to do with this. So let's engage the autopilot. 3, 2, 1, ignition. And off we go. Go ahead and time warp right from the word go, because this is like just not that important. So yeah, this is, I've made some adjustments. This is now using the Thor Aegina, basically. Thor Aegina D variant, the one that I do with the H1. So just very typical, very old launcher. This is coming off of my 60-ton launch pad. It is just whipping down there. But I think we are doing okay still. But yeah, this is a very simple sort of thing that we are getting up and just trying to do the darn science, because I would like to get more science, please and thank you. Our space program is basically driven at this point by the application of science. Like, that is how we are getting the majority of our KCT points, or at least we will be, because I'm like, you saw how expensive Gemini was, right? We really need to be saving our money for unlocks and tooling and things like that. Like the TEL Heavy cost me about 100,000 funds to tool all of the new tankage for that. Like, just the core 3-meter tanks cost just a ton of money. So we need to be careful about that and use money for that rather than on spending money on KCT points, especially when you can get them for, not for free, but for a lot cheaper. So we got 1 minute left on this burn. We're just time warping through to make my life a little bit easier. And yeah, just beautiful, beautiful scenery. And that is what this is going to be about. The Corona program, once again, was a set of spy satellites that the US used to take pictures and then send them down in little film buckets. And once we finish this burn, there we go. I will go ahead and we will get this deployed, and then I will talk a little bit about what I have changed here. So one thing we've changed is we have bigger solar panels. So we got these big chonkers here that will draw a lot of good power, and even over the amount of time that we are going to be in orbit. Sun up, maybe? Turn that off, and then we can just rotate around because it's not important at all. All right, so we are pointing at the sun because, once again, the purpose of this upper stage is just to get this thing into orbit, and then it is going to separate and head back down to Earth. All right, so we are all set there. So we separate that, and I remembered this time to put a tiny bit of force on this so that it will actually, you know, separate a little bit so that this can do its thing by... Nope, no control. All right, I have no control, but I guess that's fine. I'm not that worried about it. We're just trying to retrograde. Oh, well, hold on. So I'm just going to ignite this engine. And when we shoot off, then I will do that, and then I will switch back, and then off it goes to burn up. Yeah, so anyways, this is just the Corona satellite that you know and love. Everything is pretty much the same as it was before, where this is going to run for a certain amount of time, probably 140 some days, in the ideal scenario that I actually have enough battery power and solar panels on this to keep it charged up. So I made much bigger solar panels to make it so that it had like 50% more than the draw. So like it was, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. Well, I could. I think the darn thing's rotating for some reason, so I'm gonna have to like wait until it has good solar panel exposure and then oh, actually, look, it still says 99.6, so before the sun comes back up, I'm gonna have to jump out of this thing, but we are currently in shadow, so that's just fine. That's really annoying though. But anyways, we have 7 days of power when we are running the experiment and in shadow. So battery technology has improved since I last tried to launch these. And it also has something like 50% more power than it needs to cover the operation of the sensors and also the communications. So that means that it will have plenty of surplus power to recharge even when the solar panels start to wear down. So theoretically, that should work to make this thing survive over its entire entire lifetime. But I'm going to jump out of this now that it has 99.6, and we are going to find out if this actually worked. I'm going to put in a timer at about 145 days. There we go, and that is when we will try to bring this down to deorbit it. And so that's that. Now it's time for us to check in on the Intrepid 7. All right, the Intrepid 7 is far away from Earth now. It has been traveling for a little bit more than 2 months and has gotten quite a bit of distance because we have been traveling at incredible velocity. So I'm actually going to just remove that maneuver and have MacJeb recalculate it for me. Close all the extra business. Open up Maneuver Planner. We would like to fine-tune our closest approach to target to 20 kilometers, create node, and it's now 11 days from now. So that makes that a little bit different, but all in all, it doesn't change too much. So I don't see any reason not to just go ahead and execute that. So, okay. So I have narrowed down an issue that I have been having that I'll probably have cut out, but when I've transferred over to a vehicle through Kerbal Alarm Clock, the RCS doesn't work. Like, I can't get the RCS to work at all or any control whatsoever. So that's not super great, but it's also not that big of a deal because I've just been able to just jump back down to the tracking station and then back up. So whatever. Now we have control, we have RCS, everything is working great. We have Aerozine 50 that we are using as our new propellant. So let's go ahead and execute this node. And we can time warp very, very fast, probably. There we go. Nothing has really changed except the position of the celestial bodies. There's Mercury flying past us in the distance. All right, just a little bit longer. We are hurtling through space towards the asteroid belt at ludicrous velocity. 30 kilometers per second relative to the sun. Not that that means anything to us from where we were on Earth. Just a couple more seconds and we are going to start this little bit of a correction. Ooh, look at how pretty that is. Look how pretty that burns. That's nice. Excellent. All right, so yeah, that's our Aerozine 50 burning us a beautiful new fine-tuned flyby towards Vesta. There we go. So that's done. So let's take a look at how we did. And zooming in, you see this is why I didn't worry too much about the trajectory that we had on the initial... Oh, holy crap. Yeah, that's why I didn't worry too much about where the encounter was when I planned the maneuver. So that being done, let's point us back at the sun, and that's going to do all kinds of fun stuff. And I'll fix the trajectory again. Go. Just little tiny taps of the RCS. Like, this is with... Oh, no, it's not. Okay, there we go. Now I have fine control on, and that is working much better. So there we go. We're going to have a nice, close flyby of Vesta. Stop moving, please. So we're going to do this, and we are going to once again rely on persistent rotation to keep us relative to the sun. Fabulous. Yeah, so there we go. Now we are on our way. Stop doing stuff. What are you doing? RCS, please. Man, just the tiniest little movement is causing just humongous changes in our trajectory. Anyways, I'm not going to worry about it. I think that will be just fine. So we're just putting it right there, right through the center of Vesta. And I am now going to turn off MacJeb, turn on this. We have persistent rotation all set up. And so now we are ready for our rendezvous when we eventually get to it. in 450 days. So that's going to be a bit of a long one, and we already have 24% wear, but from what I looked at in the simulation, the wear has a bit of a curve so that it ramps up pretty quickly to this 70%-ish, but then it slows down a bit. So I'm hoping that we'll still have enough solar panel to maintain power and transmissions once we get to Vesta, because I think that's what I planned for, because I did plan to have more power than I needed because I knew this was going to be the case. But yeah, we'll see. With this, I didn't plan too many of these outer planet excursions or anything to Jupiter, because I know that the next level of solar panel is going to degrade a lot slower, and that will be really helpful. And same thing with the communications. We'll just have better communications that require less power, hopefully. But yeah, there we go. I think that should be a successful transfer to Vesta. Hopefully this doesn't... man, just looking at it is making it wobble. I better jump out of here before it gets any worse. And back in and escape. Okay, we'll call that good. And that will be our encounter with Vesta. Fingers crossed. We're going to do something a little bit different here, and I want to talk through some of my design thoughts and considerations. I've basically been stuck on this Venus design for quite a while, so let's go through it and let's talk about what goes into planning one of these bonkers missions that I'm doing lately, because it feels like every mission has been more complicated than the last, and you know, that's the progression. That's how things work in RP-1, but it's getting complicated, and I'm sure that something is lost when I just kind of throw it up into orbit and say, here it goes, it works, hooray, instead of actually walking you through. So let's just start from this spacecraft, and I'll break it down piece by piece, because I've already designed this, but it doesn't work. So that's the starting point on this. So this is what I've kind of come up with for the first part of my my new Venus mission. So before we even get into that, we should talk about objectives. So what I'd like to do is we have 3 contracts that we can be working on right now for the Venus transfer window that comes up in about 96 days. So we have a Venus orbital science probe, which wants us to get into a apposite of 30,000 kilometers, and that's it. So that's just, they want it to have a it can be a wild eccentric orbit, it can be whatever kind of orbit we want. So long as we're captured like somewhere in the sphere of influence of Venus, we're going to get something like this. This would not be very hard to do. We actually did much better than this with our last orbiter, but you have to do it with a new vessel. So that's the key thing here. So we could basically do this and just this one on its own, and that would be a really good return on investment, but it would only allow us to get one of these contracts done. There's more that I think we can do. There's also Atmospheric Probe Venus. So this requires you to enter Venus's atmosphere and dip below 110 kilometers and then transmit science. So that's complicated on a couple levels. First, it can be an old vessel, so I could deorbit a regular probe, but if you don't design something that can withstand the rigors of Venus's atmosphere, even at 110 kilometers, it's going to just break apart. So that's kind of, that seems to necessitate, in my mind, a heat shield. So we would want to have some kind of heat shield, and we would also want to be able to slow down into a good Venus orbit before we try to penetrate the atmosphere, because if we just come in from interplanetary speed, that's just adding compounding difficulty upon difficulty and making it much harder than it needs to be. That puts all of the stress on the ability of the heat shield, and I don't even have lunar heat shields unlocked yet. That's going to be too late for this particular mission. So you can kind of think of it in terms of, okay, where is the difficulty going to be? Is it going to be on putting the most stress on the heat shield, or should we put more stress on the orbiting craft and its ability to slow us down? Because we have to shed that delta V one way or the other, but how we do it and how we spend that mass is the key factor that we're thinking about. So Venus Atmospheric Probe, that is the second mission, and it's very similar to Venus Landing. So with a new vessel, once again, we have to safely land on Venus and transmit science. Now, if you're like me, you would think that, oh, these two things sound like they could be done by the same exact vessel. And I think that that's right. I think that any vessel that is going to drop within 110 kilometers, I mean, by definition, they have one of two trajectories. Either they're going to be still in orbit and try to dip down below 110 kilometers and then try to get back into orbit from there, and that might be an interesting way to go about that. Or you're just on your way to land anyways, so you might as well get both of these. So yeah, we could once again have one individual craft for each of these. We could probably put a low Earth orbit heat shield on something and have it punch through at 110 kilometers and then just hope that it doesn't melt on its way out, and then like it drops its heat shield and then gets back into orbit or something. That might be a thing. Or we could plan for a Venus atmospheric probe plus lander. And that sounds really interesting to me. The ability for us to get all three of these contracts would be, let's see, 100, 144, 180. So almost 350,000 funds on the advance, and then another almost 2 million funds on the completion of that. So that would be quite the nice lucrative mission, don't you think? That would be pretty fantastic. So that's a really interesting thing for us to consider. And so when you start to realize that these three contracts are kind of tied together in a lot of ways, it's also what I find very valuable is to then look to history. So we can look at something like the Venera probes that Russia launched, or the Venus, the Pioneer Venus project, which was a NASA project. So if you take those three missions and you actually think about the way that they play together, and it does seem like they were designed to be something that you could do all in one mission if you were able to, you know, hack the parts together and actually make that work. And so what I find valuable is to then look into history. So we can talk about the Pioneer Venus project and the Russian, which was a NASA project, and then the Russian Venera project, which both of them had a couple of similarities in their designs. Each of them had the intent to launch a probe at Venus that had two components, or multiple components, but two major features. One, they each had an orbiter that was going to detach from the other components and then stay in orbit around Venus to gather whatever scientific information that they were going to get. Each of them had different missions. And then they had landers or atmospheric probes that were attached to them that they would then separate from once they were in orbit around Venus and then drop down into the planet's atmosphere to gather information. Yeah, so both of these are very interesting programs, but they were not really done, or at least not very successful, until 1975. So that was the first time that the Russians launched a Venera mission that was an orbiter and a lander, instead of just an impactor, flyby, or a lander of some sort. So the big combo mission is something that wasn't done until much later. So 1975 for the Soviets, 1978 for the Americans. So that's not actually something that we can rely on as something that we could model and replicate back in with 1962 era technology, because remember, that's about where we're at. But if you look into things like the entry for Venera 5, which I'm looking at now, which was the first atmospheric probe of Venus. So that, you know, is very much right on the nose for that mission that we're trying to complete. It didn't have a heat shield, and the Venus multiprobe that NASA launched in 78 also did not have a heat shield, which makes me wonder if it's possible to, you know, launch something at Venus and have it enter without a heat shield without burning up. So that's something that I just don't know. So that's a test that I'm going to have to make and see how that works. But we only have the one shot, so that makes it a little tough. And looking ahead to Venera 7, we can see that even that one, which was the first soft landing on Venus, it was it basically kept the lander attached to the spacecraft, the thrusters and everything else, all the way into the atmosphere, and it basically held it as long as possible, quote unquote, and then it disconnected at some point, and then it use that basically to cool the spacecraft, I suppose. I guess there must have been some kind of cooling loop or something that was coming from inside of the spacecraft bus up to the actual lander that kept it cool before it was separated and then just landed on a parachute. So what I'm saying is I'm not seeing any mention of heat shields when entering into the atmosphere of Venus, which is interesting, but I also have to imagine that it's not quite as simple as that. I'm going to have to find a really good trajectory or adjust my speed or something. So the only way we're going to figure this out for ourselves, is by testing. And I do some amount of simulations when I'm running these missions, but I don't want to do like everything down to the wire, like every little bit tested out in simulations, and then and only then do I, make it happen on the videos. Like that doesn't seem quite right. You guys need to see failures as well as successes. This is supposed to be a real-time kind of playthrough. So yeah, so it's something that we're gonna have to kind of take our best guess at and then just execute the mission without like save scumming it basically and trying different things until we get something that works. So that cursory bit of research completed, it's time for us to start looking at what I've come up with and talk backwards from what we've research to what I have designed here. So what I have here is the actual spacecraft bus that I was planning to send to Venus. This was going to be my Pioneer Venus mission. It was intended to be 3 things. So let's break it down. So this was going to be my lander. So we have here a funky shaped avionics, and don't mind the brand new avionics window. I'll talk about that probably later on. But we have a little bit of an avionics thing here, and I'm basically using this as my everything tank. So we have a level 2 UHF antenna built in. We're using the SM3 tank type because we've gotten that level and there's no reason not to use the best we possibly can. And it's kind of a funky, wasted design because I wanted it to have a small parachute on top, and I wanted it to have its attitude jets well occluded from heat. So my thought was we would have this so that it was well away from any heat, and it was a bigger heat shield than we actually needed, because this is a bigger spacecraft bus than we actually need. But we're able to pack 5 units of the shiny new Aerozine 50 and NTO, which is that new bipropellant hypergolic RCS fuel that I've been so excited about. And 5,000 electric charge and enough avionics. Nope, this is actually a science core, so this is not actually intended to control anything at all. This is just very light little science core that is going to be heading down and should be able to maintain position if I hit like surface retrograde or whatever. Like it should be able to point. I just won't be able to control it very well manually, I think. That might not actually be true now that I think about it. This might need to be a deep space science core, which is going to increase the weight and stuff. So I guess I can use that as an opportunity to tell you about this new window. So this is basically like a wizard for configuring your probes a little bit better without having to do all the little bits individually like I've been doing. This allows you to kind of set all your configurations all at once. Basically, you set the diameter and shape that you want, and then this will help you to automatically configure the length of the tank to the best of its ability so that you can get the parameters that you're looking for. And so what I need to be able to control 172 kilograms, so that's 0.18 we're going to call it, and I would like 5,000 electric charge and a tank of, I don't know, can we just have like 10 liters? Does that work? How'd we do? So 0.18, that's great. 2,500, 5 liters of Aerozine. Perfect, that worked out great. Okay, so that will work just fine, and that's how this thing works. It's very cool. And you can just open and close that with this new GUI button here. It just defaults to open, so every time you open this, it's going to be open. So anyways, that is kind of what I'm looking at with the design on this, and that has actually increased the weight again because rocket equation and all that. So let's move this up to 21, 10, fly, it stretches it out a little bit. But we're there. Now we have avionics control, so I can make sure that this will actually be able to descend properly and use these Aerozine thrusters. Yeah, so like I said, talking through these things is actually very helpful. So that's our lander, and this is 209 kilograms, and that's even heavier than it was before, which is not awesome. So this is an additional 209 kilograms on top of everything else. So as I've mentioned before, shaving down weight is so important. But this has all the this has 4 experiments and then another one hidden under the cap here. So I've put a thermometer underneath this parachute, but it has all of the other surface experiments that we will be using, just like on our Surveyor craft. So that's how I've put this together, and the idea of this is this will get our atmospheric experiment, or the atmospheric contract, and it will also get our landed contract if it survives on the way down. And I've just put a 1 meter LEO heat shield with the hopes that that will be enough to descend from low Venus orbit. So the next part is that we'll talk about is the orbiter. So this is kind of a janky thing because I've just been testing it. I generally like to use the procedural probe cores instead of just procedural avionics so that it actually has a nice look. But for now, this is just what I've done for my testing phase. So this avionics is also deep space core. It should, in theory, make up the rest of the, be able to control the rest of the spacecraft, which has a couple features. So it has a little tank here of, once again, Aerozine and NTO, and that has the RCS quad to control the craft, and also some small thrusters that give it a little bit of extra delta V, with the idea that this is going to be how that I put this into the atmosphere. So, not getting too far ahead of myself, but with the idea that this is the payload that we are getting into Venus orbit. So 600 kilograms into Venus orbit sounds like it should be a reasonable amount. But that weight is starting to climb up because we are making it more and more capable. It's got some solar panel wings here, which I've measured in Venus orbit anyways. Oh, look at that. That's actually not enough. So we're discovering even more things as I'm playing around. Like even in Venus orbit, these little solar panels are not enough. So we need to make them a bit bigger, which once again, more weight, more weight. But that gets us perpetual power around Venus. And remember, we are going to be removing this part here. Actually, look at that. So yeah, if I shut down this avionics, then I can go back. I can actually bring these back down. Yeah. So they were fine before. So yeah, at this point they are a good amount of power around Venus, so they should be theoretically just fine. This is another deep space probe with just some electric charge and a level 3 antenna on this one because. Well, I could actually drop that down to level 2. The purpose of that is that I want this avionics to have an antenna that can talk to this one while it's on the surface. So while this probe is flying overhead, that is how this one is going to relay the communications from the ground to this satellite and then send it to Earth using this tuned level 3 S-band retractable antenna. So that is how all of that is going to work. And this has the other half of the experiments, the ones that will work in space low, space high. That does mean that there are some experiments that I just don't have in orbit, but that's fine. I'm going to be sending more capable scientific craft into orbit of Venus and all the other places later on, so I'm just not that stressed about having everything on every single vehicle. So there we go. That is the plan. We have 582 kilograms we are trying to get into orbit of Venus, and we are doing that with the bottom of this spacecraft. This is just an Agena, and using the regular fuel for the Agena. This is the Agena D model. So the initial config of this later model of the Agena, so the BA-11, it only has 2 ignitions. So that's important to keep in mind. And right now, with all this together, we have 3,600 meters per second of delta V, which I think should be enough to get into orbit. I think. If you look at the delta V map, the RSS delta V map, you can see that to capture around Venus, you need 360 meters per second of delta V, and then to get down into a low 400 kilometer circular orbit, you need another almost 3,000 meters per second of delta V, and so this has an extra 140 on top of what should, in theory, be needed. So, in theory, this should work, you'd think. The delta V maps, though, they take into account the average cost of a particular maneuver and either the average or the lowest. I'm not 100% sure, but it's usually fairly optimistic, I find. In any case, I'm not sure, I can't speak to the accuracy one way or the other of the delta V maps, but they are a very good guide for getting your thing to where it needs to be. So we have on here about 4,000 meters per second of delta V. So the idea then is we have 2 ignitions on this engine. So the way that I was thinking about that is that we would fire this once when we get to Venus to slow down into its initial orbit. And then it should be able to ignite one more time to circularize the orbit on the other side. So that should, in theory, mean that wherever I come in around Venus's orbit, like if I'm not able to adjust my trajectory in a way that's helpful, I should be able to either make that correction inside Venus's orbit by firing this engine once to do a mid-course correction, either somewhere between Earth and Venus, or do a 2-burn circularization, low circularization around Venus, depending on what's going to cost us less. So this is indeed a well underburned Agena, but it's still got up to 2.7 tons, almost 2.8 tons. So that's getting to be a lot. That's getting to be pretty darn heavy. It's as capable as we need it to be, but man, that is getting to be pretty large payload to throw out to Venus. So for that, I designed the TEL Heavy, which I think I've teased very briefly before, and it's this chonker of a launch vehicle, which looks like it should be able to do what I need it to do. So unfortunately, the thing, once you first put these things together, you need to fix all the staging and all that. So hold on a second. All right, so assembled and staged mostly properly, I hope. The Pioneer Venus and the TEL Heavy have a total delta V of 16,753, which sounds like a lot, but it really gets eaten up really quickly. So I like to leave 9,200 meters per second for my for ascent from Earth. So 9,200 minus 4,528. So if we subtract that 9,200 from the bottom 3 stages, which is the boosters, the H1 boosters, the LR-105, and then the double RL-10 Centaur upper stage. So that is what these 3 bottom stages are here in the staging menu. If you get that all together, that theoretically should leave us in orbit with 3,500 meters per second of delta V. So once again, adding up numbers from the delta V chart, if you add up all the numbers between Earth and Venus transfer, is 3.49, which translates to 3,490 meters per second of delta V, which is, again, in theory, less than what we have. So that sounds like we're right? That sounds like it's a very tight and narrow sort of mission, but it should, in theory, be very perfectly designed and balanced to make this happen. So that sounds great. That sounds like we've done it, and this will work, and it's all perfect, and I can just launch it on the video and just not even stress about it, right? Well, What I would do here is run a simulation, but unfortunately we are already at about 50 minutes, so I'm going to have to split this up between episodes just because it was going to be a lot longer. I've got a lot more design discussion to get to. But yeah, hopefully this has been interesting and entertaining for you. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. I have another bunch of design stuff to talk about this mission because it has been like worming into my brain for the better part of the last month. Trying to plan out this mission, make sure it works correctly, make sure I have the right launcher for it and everything else. So we will go into further details in a future episode, so stay tuned for that. So if you like this episode, please like and subscribe. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.